Thank you for coming, Mr. Ambassador, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
I'm very happy to be here. It's always good to see you, Khadija.
Yeah. And let's start with the latest troubles people has gone through in Azerbaijan, like human rights activists and journalists. So do you follow this situation, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, we follow it very closely. And this is an area that we are always speaking about at the very highest levels of the government. You may remember that when Hillary Clinton came here a few years ago, she said that the deepest relationships that we have are with countries that are the most democratic. I think we're in a situation where we talk past each other on democracy issues. I think we clearly look at it differently. We are who we are, and when we see what we think are abuses, we're going to speak out about it. At the same time, we think that oftentimes the government tends to be doing unnecessary things, and we can't understand oftentimes why they would, why some things would even happen.
Does that mean that you sometimes try to think with their mind and explain their actions with their point of view?
Well, I do, and I think I can put myself in the government's shoes at times. The government argues that they need to do the things that they do in order to achieve stability. They say that Azerbaijan is in a very dangerous place, which it is. We can drive, 3 hours to the Iranian border and 2.5 hours to Dagestan. And so they argue that what they do is necessary in order to maintain that stability. We have a different view. We think that things will be more stable by allowing more vibrancy in the civil society, and that is in the interest of the people of Azerbaijan in the longer term. And frankly, I think it's in the interest of the government of Azerbaijan. But I think we do look at things differently, and I think there are unnecessary things that happen sometimes that do hurt individual people and don't really serve any benefit, I don't believe, from the government standpoint. And I want to emphasize, we talk about democracy and human rights issues, and they're very serious, and we're going to continue to speak out about it. I did at that U.S.-Azerbaijan convention in Washington. But from the U.S. standpoint, we also have to recognize that Azerbaijan has taken a different course than almost all of the post-Soviet countries, and stressing its independence and sovereignty. There are a lot of areas that we do cooperate in that are in the interest of both Azerbaijan and the United States, and we appreciate that. But these issues will continue to be there, and hopefully we can work towards resolving them. I hope that the government will take advantage of their Council of Europe chairmanship to make some progress and to take seriously the action plan that the government has agreed to with the Council of Europe.
What would you call the success rate within the 6 months of the chairmanship? What would happen to let you tell that it was success?
Well, there are trials that are going on now and appeals. We've certainly been troubled by some of those trials. Some of them verdicts have not been reached. I think fair results with respect to some of those trials and appeals would show progress. I think that fewer attacks on journalists during the period would show progress. I think the reopening of a civil society dialogue would show progress. A couple of years ago, the government agreed to hold, after one of Secretary Clinton's visits, the government agreed to hold a civil society dialogue. I think there was one session, and there hasn't been any since then. I think that would help. I think that also the pressure on, there seems to be a huge amount of pressure right now on international NGOs that are working with respect to civil society, investigations by the tax ministry, by the justice ministry. Again, I don't understand why these investigations are taking place, other than to harass these organizations and the people who work for them. Lightening up on that, I think, would show progress. Freedom of assembly, I know, is part of the action plan, and hopefully, and there was some freedom of assembly during the elections. Hopefully, there'll be no problem or less problems as far as that goes. So a whole host of areas. The action plan, I think, spells out 10 or 12 areas, and we could look at each one, and I'm sure we could come up with some specifics as to the kinds of things that would help.
But on the day Azerbaijan assumed the chairmanship, several things happened on that very day, and next day they sentenced Parvez Hashimli for 8 to 8 years in prison. In coming days, we're expecting sentences for Anar Mammadli and Abdullah Bilov, the Facebook activist, and the Cabinet of Ministers issued another rules for international NGOs, which makes their work even harder. It happened 2 days ago, and then the government, the city authority, denied the.
That's what I was referring to when talking about freedom of assembly.
So, but chairmanship has started, and this happens after chairmanship started.
What can I tell you? I can only hope we'll see some improvement, and I think we'll know a lot more in the coming weeks, and we'll see what happens.
Well, actually, there is an ongoing debate on what the U.S. can do about it and what U.S. cannot do about it. Can you just enlighten people on that? Because some people have maybe bigger expectations from the U.S. than U.S. can do actually about those things. What U.S. can do in general?
I think you ask a very good question, and I can understand why some within the civil society would be somewhat frustrated and would somehow be expecting us to do more. First of all, I do think we're speaking out quite a bit, and both publicly and privately with respect to these issues. And the government knows well that these issues create irritants in the relationship that make it harder for us to accomplish some of the things that are in our mutual interest. So we certainly do that. I think it's important, whatever, even if we only can make incremental progress with the government, that we continue to speak out so that those in civil society who want to see constructive change here in Azerbaijan will at least feel that they have some moral support from us. So all of that is, I think all of that is necessary. Can we wave a magic wand and fix it? No, we can't. We can make the case. It can have some ramifications with respect to our overall relationship. We can continue to make the case strongly, but ultimately it's up to the government of Azerbaijan and the Azerbaijani people as to what changes take place.
Are there countries where U.S. is able to do more and this is just a reality for Azerbaijan?
No, it's hard for me to compare Azerbaijan to what we're doing in other countries because I'm, not directly involved in those countries. There are clearly problems here. I think there are worse countries. This is clearly not the worst country, but it's still, there's still.
But there are countries who are
still
doing better.
Still, there are plenty of countries that are doing better, and I think that one of the things I think that the government needs to consider is that, and I think which makes Azerbaijan somewhat different from some of the other countries, is that Azerbaijan presents itself as a democracy. And there are worse countries. I want to be totally clear on that. Let me just. But if Azerbaijan is presenting itself as a democracy, then it seems to me Azerbaijan has the responsibility to ensure that some of the things that have been happening here don't take place.
There is a concern that a number of people who have been arrested in Azerbaijan are actually people who bring Western ideas and ideas of European democracy to the country. And do you share that concern that the pro-Western group is among the targets?
I hate to put it in terms of pro-Western groups being targets. I do believe that the government is not a monolithic government. And I think that there are some within the government who would like to undermine the relationship between the United States and Azerbaijan, and therefore make it harder sometimes for Western organizations, or blame the United States or Europe or the West for on various issues. I think there are a lot of people with other views within the government as well, more positive views. So I wouldn't want to just label the whole government.
But when you meet President Aliyev, do you point to those people to him?
Well, I'm not going to talk specifically about conversations with President Aliyev, but I've known President Aliyev for 19 years. I think, in spite of the issues that we've been talking about, that personally I think we have a very good relationship, and I feel very free to talk to him about whatever I want to talk about, and he will say whatever he thinks. But
he's not among those people.
He's certainly not among. First of all, I'm not sure who those people are, and I certainly don't believe he personally is among those people.
Okay, but there is also a discussion, especially in social media, about the vocabulary the United States and especially you, Mr. Ambassador, use, and it's about the concern word. And it turned out that it's not only Azerbaijanis are concerned about the concern vocabulary, but also in Ukraine they recently started a hashtag Deep Concern. So the time when deep concern or concern is not a position has not come yet in U.S. diplomacy. Is that right?
I disagree with that. I think that people get too hung up over specific words, and frankly, I don't know Azerbaijani well enough, or Russian for that matter, to know how concern is translated, and maybe it has a different nuances in Azerbaijani or Russian than it does in English. You can be sure that ever since that actually quite funny satire about concernitis, which attributed to me, which I found very humorous and did not take any offense at, I have not used the word concern.
Yeah, but the trouble is that the other words like troubled and other words, they translate to the same word in Azeri.
So I would ask you, then what words are we supposed to use? Am I supposed to say, oh, Azerbaijan is a horrible place for doing these terrible unacceptable, unacceptable things, and it's going to ruin the relationship with the United States. Is that what I'm supposed to say? I also feel, I think that we do a good job at making clear how, I don't want to say concerned, how deeply disturbed we are by the events that are taking place, and we make it very clear to the government. And I think we've actually, incrementally, we've done some good with respect to certain cases. At the same time, I don't think it's in Azerbaijan's interest or civil society's interest, or individual Azerbaijani's interest, that we just say, okay, we don't like what you're doing, so we're going to walk away from Azerbaijan, or we're going to make things so difficult for you on the human rights questions that we recognize we're just not going to be able to deal with you. I think that would be bad for Azerbaijan. Who else is going to speak up for Azerbaijan's sovereignty and independence vis-a-vis Russia, particularly after Ukraine? Who else is going to be a buffer to make sure that the Nagorno-Karabakh negotiations are fair or don't go in an unfairly bad direction? Who else is going to work with Azerbaijan? There are some, but on counterterrorism types of problems. I know that people think that we care too much about energy. Yeah, we care about energy, but we are not going to receive any Azerbaijani oil or gas. But we do think it's important as a counter to Russian monopolization in some places. And if we just didn't care or walked away, I don't think that would be very helpful either. So there has to be some kind of balance. I know that many, maybe yourself included, would wish we would do more, but we do the best we can under the circumstances. And I think we've actually spoken out more in the last couple of years than ever has been the case in the past on the human rights issues.
Mm-hmm. And since you mentioned Ukraine, and let's go to post-Ukraine part of the questions. Has Ukrainian crisis affected the U.S. views on Nagorno-Karabakh issue? Has it changed?
Not on the substance. It's affected our views from the standpoint that we believe that it is even more important to resolve Nagorno-Karabakh. It's always been important, but I think it's even more important now, post-Ukraine crisis. It doesn't help Azerbaijan to have an area of instability, meaning the whole Nagorno-Karabakh and the occupied territories surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh. It doesn't help having that potentially explosive situation out there. And who knows, after looking at what Russia has done with Crimea and Ukraine, who knows whether Russia or third party or other third parties would take advantage of that situation. And that it's important, I think, to get it resolved, and we keep trying to emphasize that. The other thing, we emphasize another thing with respect to Ukraine, and that is essentially what I said before, that given the situation now, Azerbaijan, I think, has to do, and the United States, we both have to work to protect the relationship, because, as I said before, who else is going to stand up for Azerbaijan's independence? United States and Europe, basically. And I think that the government, certainly many in the government, including the president, recognize that the relationship with the United States is important. I think one of the unfortunate things from Azerbaijan may be that the government doesn't want to see anything happen here like what happened in Maidan Square, and that may be giving them, in some people's views, might be giving them an excuse to crack down even harder on with respect to human rights and democracy issues. That's an unfortunate lesson from Ukraine, but I do sort of see a double track. Yes, it's important to have a relationship with the United States, given what's happened. On the other hand, we can never let happen here, and that may be making it more difficult for civil society.
So, in your views, there is another lesson the government could take from Maidan.
Well, my argument would be, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but if you take too hard a line and don't give enough breathing space to civil society, arguably it's more likely that at some point there could be a real issue. It may not be today, but maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. But I think that's the risk if civil society is closed off. If civil society is closed off too much.
Well, one thing Ukrainian crisis taught the world maybe is how corruption can bring down a state.
That as well.
And
Absolutely.
it shows how destabilizing it can be. Is U.S. going to respond more actively to corruption challenges in
Well, we always raise corruption as an issue. And again, questions, what can we do about it? I do think that the government has made some progress with respect to day-to-day corruption issues that can so infuriate, individual citizens. I was talking to an Azerbaijani who works at the embassy earlier today, and I said, do you still have there's still problems with the police taking bribes if you're stopped, for traffic. And he said, no, that's much better. That if you're stopped now, you can either pay a fine by using a credit card or you get something in the mail, but police are not generally asking for bribes at this point. So he said, it's just one person telling me this, and I've heard that from others. There are still issues, obviously, in the education area. There are issues in the health area. I think the Assams have actually been very helpful, and I hear that universally it has to become more widespread. So, in trying to be fair and objective, I think the government and certainly the president has realized that the day-to-day corruption can create problems within the society. I think that they recognize that abuse by local authorities can go too far, and have
there is another view on this. They say, there is a view, people say that before we had monopolization of the economy, now we also have monopolization of bribes. Monopoly on bribes. So
right.
only those in top.
Yeah. Well, it's it's an interesting point of view. Maybe the individual policemen aren't taking bribes, but I think even the government would admit corruption is a problem at higher levels as well. There seems to be some action being taken against some relatively high-level officials, but it's also seems to be selective, and there's still a long way to go.
But corruption is not just petite bribes, and it's also how to give an access to people, to give an access to opportunities for people of Azerbaijan. So equal opportunities. I
think that's right, and even apart from, I don't even think you need to necessarily label that as corruption. I think that the monopolization and the sort of oligarchic economy is a real problem, and that for Azerbaijan to grow and be successful, particularly outside of the energy area, I think Azerbaijan does do a good job in the energy area, but we all know that, and the president would agree with this, that diversification is tremendously important. But there's not going to be...
Do you take this issue in your conversations with him as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does he take this issue personal? Because his family is part of the corruption.
I believe he understands the necessity of diversifying the economy. The problem, the issue within, and I'm not going to say it's President Aliyev, but the problem I think that still needs to work out are that the steps need to be taken so that entrepreneurs who go into business feel that have the incentive and feel that as they grow and become more successful, that they're not going to be interfered with by monopolized sectors. And when I talk to younger business people, I think they see it opening up some, but it still needs to open up a lot more.
Well, there is an opinion that even anti-corruption authorities, the worldwide, or the embassies and ambassadors, they are refraining to touch those issues because it concerns president's family as well.
Well, I don't think we refrain at all from discussing the issues overall. Obviously, we're not in a position that we would be accusing any specific individuals, but we have been very strong in several areas. One, pushing for WTO accession, which I think would help open up the economy. Constantly talking about problems with respect to customs and taxation, which can make it very difficult to do business. To finally trying to get finally past a competition code that means something, that encouraging non-interference, less interference with entrepreneurs and new companies and as they're becoming more successful. I think we can work on all of those areas without. It's not going to do us any good to say, you're a bad person, you're doing this, that, or the other thing. But we can certainly, we certainly can raise at all levels these issues. Some of our AID programs are working with young entrepreneurs, with women, in the agriculture area, with farmers and processors to try and get some independence there. It's the only way the economy is going to grow. And
some of the U.S.-owned hotel brands, they operating here in Azerbaijan, they refused to provide space for NGOs for their events. And some of these NGOs are getting grants from the USAID as well. Former ambassador Richard Kozlerich, he suggested that U.S. Embassy in Baku should never use these hotels for their events and or help their businesses. What's your view on those?
I agree with that. And there was, I don't know if I'd state it quite that strongly, but there was one specific case that I don't want to get into where there are two sides to the story, and I'm not sure exactly which is accurate, but we are making clear to every hotel that if you have an American name, even if it's a franchise and the hotel is owned by Azerbaijanis, that we will make clear to their headquarters back in Washington that it is totally unacceptable to refuse to allow organizations that sign contracts that pay according to the terms of the hotel, that it's unacceptable to not allow those conferences to take place. Now, we can't put a gun to their head, but we can use our best efforts to cajole them and to work with their headquarters, European and American headquarters.
So I guess 4th of July celebration will happen in the place that is open to everyone.
And the 4th of July celebration that happens in the place that's open to everyone is the garden of the U.S. Embassy.
Okay. So, because it used to be in the hotels that are not open to everyone.
Well, we've at least since certainly the last 3 or 4 years, it's been in the embassy garden.
Yeah, and we'll go back to Nagorno-Karabakh issue. James Warlick said there are 6 elements to achieve the peace there, and are they achievable though?
It's achievable if the countries involved, if Armenia and Azerbaijan, have the political will to achieve it. I mean, there's no question that there are 2 key points ultimately. And it's a question the negotiations and how things are phased and how it gets accomplished. You have to get into details, but there are 7 occupied territories. They have to go back to Azerbaijan. I mean, and I think we should be loud and clear about that. And that's one of the 6 points.
It should be unconditional?
As part of the settlement, as part of the negotiations. But that any settlement will require those 7 territories to go back to Azerbaijan. And I think Jim Warlick made that clear, and that is, that's clearly our policy. Yes, there could be a small corridor into Nagorno-Karabakh through Lachin, and that has to be negotiated. And when I talk about the 7 occupied territories, I differentiate Nagorno-Karabakh only because what Nagorno-Karabakh, as a result of the final status, has to be determined as a result of those negotiations. And the sooner that the 2 sides can get together and work out the concrete steps as to how to accomplish all of that. It's not as simple as I'm saying, but how many territories may come back first, then what kind of security guarantees would there be, and then do you do Kalbajar, for example, next? Then when is there ultimately some kind of referendum or determination as to the final status of Nagorno-Karabakh at what point in time? All of these things have to be negotiated. But none of it can happen without the 2 countries and the 2 presidents being committed to resolve that. We're committed to help that happen. We can't force the settlement. Russia also has to be committed for that to happen.
But they can force.
I don't know whether they can force it or not, but they could prevent it. And it's a good question. If the 2 presidents finally decided, okay, this is the plan and we're going to carry it through, I don't know whether Russia could prevent that. But, take the, I'm getting things a little circular. I don't think Russia can, I guess what I'm trying to say, I don't think Russia can force may not be able to force either Armenia or Azerbaijan to sign on the dotted line. They could threaten military force, I don't know, but it'd be very difficult to do. And it may be that they could not prevent it if the 2 presidents were really determined. On the other hand, because of the pressure that they could put on both countries, maybe even more particularly Armenia, if they decided to prevent it, it's a possibility that that could happen. It would be interesting to see if the 2 presidents could ever come to a resolution whether Russia would try to prevent it or not. The other question is is Russia totally satisfied with the status quo right now? Because right now, Russia has leverage on both Armenia and Azerbaijan, and maybe continues to have the most leverage if there's not a resolution. I mean, I've heard people with a view that what Russia is looking for, they don't want war, they want to see basically, no hostilities, but they may not want resolution. And I don't know. I think that if the 2 presidents really work together to try to achieve a settlement, that will test the Russians' resolve as to whether they want it to take place.
How do you see in post-Ukraine period? Do you see that the level of independence of Azerbaijan, has it grown in the past 1 year, or it's even Azerbaijan is now less independent than it used to be before Ukraine?
I don't know that it's less independent. I mean, I don't think Azerbaijan's ability to conduct its own business in an independent way has changed much before and after the Ukraine situation. I think perhaps what's changed is the calculation as to risk as to future interference with Azerbaijan. I'm not sure that Azerbaijan has seen it yet. It could see it in the future. I think the Putin trip to Azerbaijan last summer was very interesting.
And it was before elections.
It was before the elections, and I think some read that trip to have shown that Putin saying, yes, we'd rather have you as President Aliyev, than anybody else at this point. I think that visit could be interpreted to be saying, okay, you're independent. Let's cooperate as much as we can, but we recognize your independence. I don't know.
Do you think Putin can give such reasonable messages, like we accept that you're independent?
Maybe. I don't know. I'm just talking off the top of my head. Obviously, I'm not in Putin's mind. I wasn't part of those meetings. Do you think that either Iran or Russia would like to have common borders right now? I mean, in other words, if Russia were to, I'm not predicting that this would ever happen, but even if Russia had the possibility to bring Azerbaijan, back into its fold, do Russia and Iran want to have the same border at this point? Does that make sense?
I guess Azerbaijan should feel like a piece of paper between two knives of scissors.
And you're making the point that the government makes all the time, that they use that as the argument to justify the need for stability.
But as it's so. I guess Jonas is making signs that we have to finish.
Maybe he thinks I'm talking too much, but it is an opportunity to tell you what I believe. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I believe it's, am I right? It's last 3 months of your
we're going to be leaving late summer.
Yeah. And I hope we will have chance to talk to you about it at the end of your service as an ambassador. I hope you will be still involved in the business of this region. But
I'm sure I will, one way or another.
But you have 3 months to go yet,
right.
3-4 months to go. What are do you have some goals to achieve? Just to get them now, so to check with you at the end.
I mean, if I could wish for results between now and and when I leave, it would be a greater understanding and appreciation between us as to the importance of the relationship, which includes Azerbaijan's, I think, very brave maintenance of its independence. It includes cooperation in the areas that are in our common interest, but also that there be more of an understanding with Azerbaijan as to the need to open up society further, to create greater stability, and to avoid some of the unnecessary actions that, again, that hurt individual people, but that also create unnecessary irritants in the relationship, because there's that at least I can't understand any real benefit to some of the things that happen.
And thank you again for coming today, and it's been pleasure. Is there anything you wanted me to ask and I didn't?
No, I think we've covered everything.
Did we?
And
well. Hope to see you again soon.
I hope so. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.